Hi there and welcome. Jonathan here. These talks are offered freely so that no one is ever denied access to these practices. Your support makes a big difference. If you feel inspired to make a donation, please go to jonathanfoust.com. Thank you. So this talk is to share some strategies for transforming your relationship with physical pain. I thought I'd start off with an insurance claim, just to set the tone here. I'm writing in response to your request for additional information about my insurance claim. In block number 3 of the accident claim form, I wrote, "Trying to do the job alone as the cause of my accident." You said in your letter that I should explain that statement more fully. I trust the following details will be sufficient. I'm a bricklayer by trade. On the date of the accident, I was working alone on the roof of a new 6-story building. When I completed my work, I discovered that I had about 500 pounds of bricks left over. Rather than carrying the bricks down by hand, I decided to lower them in a barrel by using a pulley which was attached to the side of the building at the 6th floor level. Securing the rope at ground level, I went up to the roof, swung the barrel out, and loaded the bricks into it. Then I went back down to the ground level and untied the rope, holding it tightly to ensure a slow descent of the 500 pounds of bricks. You will note in block number 22 of the claim form that my weight is 150 pounds. Due to my surprise at being jerked off the ground so suddenly, I lost my presence of mind and forgot to let go of the rope. Needless to say, I proceeded up the side of the building at a very rapid rate of speed. In the vicinity of the 3rd floor, I met the barrel coming down. This explains my fractured skull and collarbone. Slowed only slightly, I continued my rapid ascent, not stopping until the fingers of my right hand were 2 knuckles deep into the pulley. By this time, I had regained my presence of mind and was able to hold tightly to the rope in spite of my pain. At approximately the same time, however, the barrel of bricks hit the ground and the bottom fell out of the barrel. Devoid of the weight of the bricks, the barrel then weighed approximately 50 pounds. I refer you again to the information in block number 22 regarding my weight. As you might imagine, I began a rapid descent down the side of the building. In the vicinity of the 3rd floor, I met the barrel coming up. This accounts for the 2 fractured ankles and the lacerations of my legs and lower body. The second encounter with the barrel slowed me enough to lessen my injuries when I fell on the pile of bricks. And fortunately, only 3 vertebrae were cracked. I'm sorry to report, however, as I lay there on the bricks in pain, unable to stand and watching the empty barrel 6 stories above me, I again lost presence of mind and let go of the rope. The empty barrel weighed more than the rope, so it proceeded at a rapid descent down the side of the building, landing on and breaking both of my legs. I hope I have furnished information sufficient to explain why trying to do the job alone was the stated cause of the accident. That's a lot of pain. But there's a great phrase that says, pain plus time equals humor. You know, you're on vacation, it's a terrible experience, but over time it becomes one of your best stories. So the talk is about how do you work with pain, physical pain, when it occurs. And I've kind of dreaded this talk because usually when I have some theme to talk about, something happens to me that week. But I haven't had any pain this week, so far so good. I've mentioned in the past that since about the age of 6, I've had pretty crippling migraines. And I've had more pain than some, but certainly a lot less pain than many others. There are a few things I'd like to cover in our little bit of time we have tonight. The first is just to review some of the fundamentals of the lens of Buddhist psychology on pain. And I'd like to talk about what it means when you can cultivate present moment awareness without adding anything to your experience, what's oftentimes referred to as the second arrow. That is when we add kind of a mental process onto the physical experience, we create more pain. The third is the strategy of what we could call whole body awareness, a way that you can pay attention to physical pain, including the whole body. And fourth are some strategies for opening the frame of pain. How do you open your awareness where you can hold your pain in a different way? When I lived in an ashram for a couple decades, one of my colleagues was bedridden for a year, an entire year, with horrible, crippling back pain. And she went to a seminar in New York City with a doctor who has had amazing results in working with back pain. You may be familiar with him. His name is Dr. John Sarno. And back then, like 30 years ago, the book he wrote was called Mind Over Back Pain. And he identified a certain term, which he called myofascial tensionitis. And as I was kind of researching him, he's updated that term. It's now called tension myositis syndrome, which basically means stress. That much of the pain you have, and particularly with back pain, much of that pain is emotional. That when you experience pain, we have different ways of suppressing it, and your body holds that pain, and it gets more and more chronic over time. Just a quote from someone who summarized his work, who said, to be perfectly clear, in his theory, the cause of pain is not the structural abnormalities. That's tendons or muscle tears, tissue inflammation, herniation, degeneration, decrepit muscles. And it's not behavioral problems such as poor posture or bad ergonomic setup. None of them are responsible for your pain. None. So this is a doctor who's been at this for about 30 years, basically saying your issues are in your tissues. That much of your pain is related to undigested emotions, undigested stress. So this friend of mine who went to a weekend seminar, kind of got out of bed, sort of got like carried into this seminar, came back after a weekend, and on Monday morning she was riding horses. That was a little extreme, but it does really point to this connection between the mind, emotions, and physical pain. So this mind-body connection is the place to look. It's all about what's happening in the body and how you're relating to it, how you're holding it. There are lots of studies on the effectiveness of meditation and mindfulness on pain, and some studies say that meditation can reduce kind of the inflammation of pain by 30 to 50%. And it doesn't necessarily make your pain go away, but it can help you shift in how you relate to it. And it can give you options as to how you pay attention to it. So we have some of the core teachings through Buddhist psychology. We have the Four Noble Truths. And if you can, just for a moment, if you can just make your hand into a fist. And if you really tighten your fist, and you can feel that tension, this is the first noble truth, the first observation, that stress happens. It's not that life is stress or life is suffering. What the Buddha said, it happens. If you got a body, you're going to experience stress. The second insight, or the second noble truth, is there's a cause for that stress. The stress has some form of contraction, some form of identification, some aspect of letting go. So now if you relax, just relax your hand and just feel that, the subtle energy, the sensations that flow into your hand. This is the third insight, or the third noble truth, and that is you can let go. Whatever you're holding on to, you can let go. Now, if you focus on keeping your hand relaxed, and this points toward the fourth insight, or the fourth noble truth, and that is that there are ways that you can remember to let go. And this is the path, the technologies, the awarenesses that help you to remember that you can let go. So, this is so fundamental to the practice. Whenever you find yourself in stress or tension or pain or suffering, it's recognizing it happens and recognizing that there's some cause. There's some form of a clench. There's some form of identification. When you find that, it's possible to let go. And that there are technologies and practices that will help you to remember. There's so many ways you can come in on this practice of meditation. There are some that say it's all about the mind. It's all about noticing what happens in the mind to whatever occurs. And there are others that say, well, no, it's really about just noticing your reactivity. Noticing how you move away from pain and you move toward pleasure. Just pay attention to that reflex. Then there are others that say, no, it's all about non-judging awareness. It's all about going to that space of just equanimity and observation. And then there are others that say, no, it's really all about the body. It's all about paying attention to the intimate experience of the here and now in the body. And they're all right. They're all true. But the body is really considered the foundation of our practice. When we look at the foundations of awareness, there's energy in the body, and we react to the body and the mind, and then we become aware of our habitual ways of reacting, the mental patterns, and then we begin to see into the nature of reality. But the Buddha said very clearly that everything you seek, everything you want to know about reality can be found inside, as he said, this fathom-long body. Today I looked up how long a fathom is. A fathom is 6 feet. So from now on, I'm going to tell people I'm 1.4 fathoms. So recognizing these four noble truths is really helpful. Another very instructive element when you begin to deconstruct your experience of life is recalling the 3 characteristics of reality. The first being impermanence. Anything born of causes and conditions is subject to change. The second is suffering. How you relate to change directly impacts the degree that you'll experience stress and suffering. If you resist, you'll experience stress and suffering. If you don't resist, you'll have less stress and suffering. And the third points to the inquiry as to who and what you really are. That there's an element of you that is subject to change. Everything that has to do with causes and conditions, your body, your emotional behavior, all of that. But there's also something inside of you that's not conditioned. There's something in you, or you are something that is changeless as well. This can be very, very helpful when you find yourself caught in physical pain. And we'll talk about that a little more. So our experience of pain, of course, it arises in the body, but it also arises in the mind. It arises in the emotional body as well. And how you are with your physical pain depends on how much you'll suffer. And this leads to the teaching of the second arrow. So I have a very clear memory of being somewhere between 6 and 8 years old, lying in my bed around 7 p.m. on it was a summer evening. And I remember I grew up on a farm. I remember the sounds outside. It was still really light. The heat. We didn't have air conditioning in the farmhouse, so it was really, really hot. And all the activity going on outside. And I remember very distinctly trying not to blink because blinking would just send like a shockwave through my body. And I remember a door slamming downstairs and feeling that, like, the sound vibration of the door, like just tearing through my nervous system. And I remember trying desperately to figure out what I had done wrong to deserve so much pain. I was thinking about this morning, and I know that I've gotten like a crippling migraine headache at least every 3 months since I was 6 or 7, and oftentimes a lot more. So that's something between minimally 250, maybe 750 times that I've been paralyzed by a headache. I've gotten pretty good at sensing when they're starting to come on, and I'm also pretty paranoid about what might bring them on. So I eat a really, really pure diet, and I try to do things that give me the illusion I have some control over my experience. And as I kind of describe my migraines, I've referred to them a lot. I don't mean to harp on them so much, but it's how I kind of relate to the whole pain thing. And what I really know is that the physical pain I've experienced is infinitesimal compared to the pain that many, many people endure. So many people have chronic pain, just the pain that doesn't go away. What happens when you experience physical pain? There's kind of an internal conversation that happens. And in the study of pain, there's a real understanding that the human mind doesn't just simply feel the pain, but it processes all the information that comes with it. So your mind is going to be scanning for all the different sensations, trying to figure out all the underlying causes of why they're there. And before you know it, when you're in physical pain, you're flooded with unsettling memories. Can anyone relate? And then the mind starts churning or hallucinating. What if I can't stop this? What did I do to make this happen? What if this keeps getting worse? And in that mental process, we begin to amplify the pain. And the sensations, the experience begin to spiral into more and more intensity. Can anyone relate to that experience? Yeah. Now, what happens is that when you experience pain on a regular basis, it kicks in very habitual patterns. And they're actually kind of like grooves where you react kind of the same way to pain, and that gets really habituated. As they say, the neurons that fire together wire together. The brain scans show that people who have chronic pain have more brain tissue dedicated to feeling pain. It's like the volume gets turned up and you can't turn it down. They've also noticed with brain scans and relating to pain that there's no such thing as like a pain center in the brain, but it's more of like a pain matrix that there are different parts of the brain that identify the source of the pain and process it, relate it to past experiences, monitor it, etc., etc. So the physical pain is real. What we add to it mentally can exponentially heighten your experience of stress and suffering. And the challenge is to experience the sensations just as they are. So if you would, you don't have to, but if you would, just raise one arm up overhead. You might notice how, as you have your arm overhead, it might actually feel kind of pleasant, for a while, kind of stretching it up there. And what happens is we experience physical sensation, like energy arises. We're kind of this energy matrix. And sensations arise, and they are immediately categorized by the mind. All sensations fall into three categories. There are sensations that are pleasant. There are sensations that are unpleasant. And then there are sensations that are neutral. They're neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And what happens is, if we don't pay attention, we find ourselves reacting to those sensations unconsciously. And you might now even begin to noticing, like you're beginning to react a little bit to the sensations, like, how the hell long is it going to make me keep my arm up? This is the second arrow. This is the mind coming in with a commentary and adding to the actual, just pure sensation experience of your arm. So the fact that we're going to keep our arm up for the next half hour is kind of immaterial to what's really happening here. But if you would for a moment, just close your eyes and just notice the energetic experience of your arm. Can you identify the unpleasant sensation? Can you identify anything that might feel pleasant? And can you identify anything that's neutral? It's not pleasant nor unpleasant. When it comes to the experience of physical pain, part of the essential practice is to experience without labels. And just without a past or without a future, it's just pure, raw sensation. Now here's kind of a fun thing to do, as you might be beginning to feel a little bit more unpleasant. With your eyes closed, very slowly let your hand come down and notice how the sensations change. Can you watch the transformation from unpleasant to neutral or pleasant? And sense who you are as the observer. There was a classic teaching story from the Buddhist time of an elderly monk who was very, very sick, and his body was literally decaying. And he was visited by a number of other senior monks. And he had this radiance and this peace about him. And he was asked by these monks, how can you be radiating such well-being and such peace when your body must be in so much pain? And he related to them a core teaching from the Buddha, and that is to keep the awareness in the body, in and of itself, putting aside greed, fear, and concern for the world. And that's the essence of the teaching of the second arrow. If you can experience the pain in and of itself, it still hurts, but you're not adding anything to it. It's the resistance to the pain that exponentially increases the suffering. The classic formula is P times R equals S. Pain times resistance equals suffering. It's possible to have a lot of pain with no resistance and not suffer. Pain with no suffering. You can have the slightest little bit of discomfort and resist it enormously and have enormous suffering. So part of the practice is to notice how you're relating to the sensations. And I find when I'm in chronic pain, if I can experience it without a past or without a future, without hallucinating how terrible it's going to be, or worrying about the work I'm not getting done, it's just what it is. It's bearable. Most of the time when we're in pain, we want to nuke it. We want to make it go away. And there are some wonderful drugs that can help you do that. It's quite interesting to see the chronic addiction level to opiates in our culture right now. Because we have these drugs that can make it go away. And of course they put you right into a horrible loop. Another classic teaching story, which you may have heard, is if you have a glass of water, and in that glass of water you put in a cup of salt, and you sip that water, it'll be undrinkable. It'll be so salty. But if you go down to a lake and you put that cup of salt into the lake, it'll be undetectable if you were to taste the water, because the lake is so much more vast. It can contain and hold the salt. When we get tight, and when we get in fear and physical pain, we fixate on the salt and we fixate on the pain. So there are some very interesting strategies that can be very, very helpful for helping to train your attention on some unique and different ways on being with the physical pain when it's there. Now, one technique, just to name, which can be very, very helpful, is sort of the opposite of giving it more space. It's actually zooming in. Joseph Goldstein talks about this, and he describes it as connecting the dots. Let's say you've got really, really bad knee pain. Most of the time, either we fixate on it or we don't want to see it, but we try not to be with it. So here the practice is to actually go inside the pain. And remember that there are three categories of sensation. Sensation that feels pleasant, sensation that feels neutral, and sensation that feels pleasant. So what you try to do is locate where exactly is the unpleasant sensation. And when I can do it takes some concentration, but when I can do this, it's almost like it takes you into a molecular level of investigation. And what happens for me, and I believe what happens for most people, is those unpleasant points of pain, they look solid from out here, but when you get inside it, it's moving. They're like little dots of light that are just moving around, almost like little atoms moving around, and you can't really pin down exactly where the pain really is. Now, the other thing you can do is to explore how intimately can you find the relationship between the unpleasant and the pleasant or neutral sensations. How close are they? And what happens sometimes, not all the time, is when you try to zoom into it kind of on a cellular or molecular level, you begin to see that it's filled with impermanence. It looks solid from the outside, but on the inside, it's moving, it's shifting, it's changing. Now, when I do this practice, sometimes it feels like the pain gets amplified, which isn't that much fun. But sometimes there's a little bit of a dissolving or a softening, because I'm being with it so intently, with so much intention. The classic line from yoga is that energy follows awareness. So whatever you focus on, the energy moves in that direction. And sometimes just by zooming in and being really intimate with that aliveness of sensation where you feel pain, the energy flows there as well. And there may be some relief or some kind of a shifting or a widening or a bleeding of sensation. So zooming in can be very, very helpful sometimes. There's another approach, which is probably my number one go-to approach, which I've shared here before, but I wanted to share it again. I'd like to tell you how it works, and then we'll take a few minutes to practice it together. And this is recognizing, again, the three categories of sensation: pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. When you're in pain, the mind fixates. Again, that's what the mind does. It notices it, it associates stories with it, it looks for the cause, it's analyzing it, and it's building a narrative around it. So the mind fixates on where the pain is. What you do in this meditation is you identify the unpleasant sensation as zone 1. Everything else, the pleasant and the neutral sensations, are zone 2. So rather than fixating your attention on zone 1, your job is to keep your attention in zone 2. When you notice the mind fixating, you bring it back to zone 2. And how you navigate zone 2 is you let your attention move freely, like a butterfly, just moving around. You let it move spontaneously, and you do two things. You'll name the location of where your attention goes, and then you'll name the quality of feeling. So it might be left elbow relaxed, left thumb open. When you notice the mind drifting over to zone 1, bring it back to zone 2. Interesting things begin to happen after a little while, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. So let's give this a try. We'll just take just a few minutes here just to kind of get a sense of how this works. And if you're not feeling physical pain right now, what I'd like to suggest is you choose somewhere in your body where you feel strong sensation. And again, it might be a neutral sensation, but whatever it feels strongest. And let the eyes close. And identify as best you can where you find zone 1. And for the next minute or so, you will be letting your attention move freely and spontaneously through zone 2, where you feel neutral or pleasant sensation, naming the location and the quality of sensation there. So you've been practicing for about a minute. Just notice the relationship between zone 1 and zone 2. And just continue to let your awareness flow freely through zone 2. It's possible you may feel some kind of a shift. Some people report after some time there's kind of a bleeding of zone 1 into zone 2. And you might explore just for a little while, let your attention move into zone 1, and again, let your attention now move freely and just label or note the location and the quality of feeling. And if it feels too unpleasant, just move back to zone 2. Going to take just another 45 seconds or so. And now just releasing the technique completely, and just let your awareness rest for a moment. So this is just a little taste of this technique. But there are a few things that can occur. And some people recognize, as I do, almost every time I do this, you begin to recognize that there may be a lot of your body that actually feels okay. Like with a migraine, almost every time I have the recognition, 94% of my body feels okay. 6% is freaking out, but 94% is okay. Sometimes people report that just by sustaining their attention in zone 2, it sort of invokes a relaxation response, and the zone 1 begins to soften. It'll either soften or fade, or the distinction between zone 1 and zone 2 begins to relax a little bit. And who knows why? Part of it is that because it does invoke the relaxation, kind of reflex, soft tissue begins to relax, etc., etc. There was one teacher who had chronic pain in the left side of her body, and every night, this was her technique. She would keep her attention on the other side of the body, and that would allow her to fall asleep. So this can be a very effective way of working with physical pain. It's not about avoiding the sensation. It's actually about learning to be with it. It's actually a classic technique taught for those who are healing from trauma. That when your body is in a trauma reflex, fear and helplessness, you explore where you don't feel it. And as I've shared before, with chronic trauma, sometimes I'll ask people, where don't you feel this? And many people will say the tip of my nose or my earlobes actually feel okay. There are fewer nerve endings. And then that becomes a resource for you. And from that place where you actually have a sense of presence, you can then practice what's called titration or pendulation, where you can begin to move into the unpleasant just a little bit, just feel it, and then come back. So if you find yourself in chronic pain, this may be a really helpful go-to practice for you. It's been helpful for me. I have a lot more to get through in no time. Creating more space can be very helpful. But I'll close with a story that really has to do about creating emotional space as well. It's a story of a good friend of mine many years ago. In the birth of her first child, was in incredible pain and really feeling exhausted and helpless. It's hard to imagine that kind of pain. It's very, very humbling. I remember Carol Burnett saying, men, if you want to try to understand what pain of childbirth is like, take your upper lip and stretch it over your head. That'll give you a little bit of an idea. But she was at the end of her resources and desperate because she was in so much pain. And she turned to her nurse and said, "Tell me something that's going to help me get through this." And the nurse looked her deep in the eyes and she said, "I have 4 children." And some deep inner reserve she didn't know she had just kicked in. She said, "If she can do it, I can do it. I am joining the mothers of the earth," and went through it. And later she saw the nurse. It's a true story, supposedly. I believe it's true. And she went to the nurse and she said, "I cannot tell you how important that was." And the nurse said, "I don't have any children." I didn't know what to say, and I thought that would make you feel better. The punchline, in many ways, and maybe the ultimate way that we can reframe our pain, is through calling on the practice of Tonglen meditation, which in essence comes down to these words: other people feel this too. Other people feel this too. And even as I was preparing my talk and doing a little bit of research and reading about other people's pain, it shifted my relationship to my own pain. The pain that I experience on a regular basis, number one, is not unique. And number two, it's nothing compared to the pain that other people go through. So that practice of Tonglen, when you are in pain, of remembering that other people feel this too, it opens the frame. It's the lake that can hold that cup of salt. And at the same time, when you experience well-being, when you're experiencing pleasant sensation and experiencing a sense of connectedness and the mystery, the Tonglen practice is equally effective. Other people feel this too. That can hold the joy as well as the sorrow. So why don't we close for a short yet brief meditation. So you might let your eyes close and again slow down the breath. And acknowledging as you move through life that there are times of pain and suffering. That other people feel this too. No matter what arises in your life, that there is a capacity to be with. All this sensation, the commentary, the dialogue of the mind, ultimately it points to this question of who and what are you really? Awareness is not in pain. Awareness is not scared. Whether you zoom in to the sensations or zoom out into the space that contains them, all these practices point to this inquiry of who you are, this mystery of what it means to be. If there is anyone you know of who might be in pain right now, you might hold them in your heart and wish them well. That they may find equanimity, the capacity to hold their experience in wisdom and compassion. And offering that well-wishing out to all beings. May all beings feel happy, at peace, and free. And when you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And you can let your eyes open. Thank you for your kind attention. A few announcements before we end. I'm leading a day-long retreat, which is beginning to fill up. If you're interested.